Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? Thank you. Tonight, we are fortunate to have not one, but two journalists of national fame here at our awards dinner. Yes, before I even introduce them. Judy Woodruff, anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, and Lesley Stahl, CBS 60 Minutes correspondent. When Woodruff and Stahl broke into journalism, they both faced challenges because they were women, far steeper than the challenges of women today, only to rise to the top of our profession. To get her foot in a TV newsroom, Woodruff had to serve as a secretary, in addition to delivering the weekend weather report. Stahl has credited her hiring at CBS to a 1972 FCC mandate that ordered the industry to give women and minorities a break. You'll find our two stars' journeys in journalism in your printed program, and I'm pretty sure you'd rather hear more from them than from me, so for their conversation, let's start now. Judy and Lesley, please come up.
They taught me how to hold the mic, Judy. I wanted to come up and introduce myself as Judy Woodruff.
And I'm Lesley Stahl. And you know who used to get us mixed up?
Guess. Tell him.
Ronald Reagan.
He used to call us, to avoid total embarrassment, both dear. Yes, dear. No, dear. All right, so let's start. We have no idea what we're going to do, so we're just going to chat with each other. So was your first job in journalism being the weather girl?
Well, you could say my first job. You have to remember, or you should know, that I started out not knowing I was going into journalism. I was majoring in math and was moving along and thinking I was going to do, somebody told me I could be an actuary for an insurance company. But I had a professor in college who basically thought women shouldn't be taking calculus. So I was discouraged by that. But at the same time, I had a wonderful woman professor, political science professor, who got me so excited about American politics and political science. I switched majors and frankly planned to make that my career. After 2 summers working in Washington, I was told by women working on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, that the opportunities for women were pretty narrow and that I shouldn't come back to Washington and work try to get a job in Congress or in the executive branch. I went back to college my senior year. I was at Duke, and I was sharing this with my professor. I was very discouraged, and he said, well, did you ever think about covering journalism? And it was literally a moment like that. And you kind of have a moment like that, don't you?
The thunderbolt moment. Well, I asked a reporter, what do you do all day? Now, I grew up where we didn't take journalism courses. Almost no reporters who were hired, when I was hired in 1972, had gone to journalism school that I knew of. So this guy told me what he did all day. And I thought, oh, brave new world. I never heard of such a wonderful job. I was dying to do it instantly. And it seemed perfect for me because it sounded from him as though you just sucked up all the gossip in the world and then you just threw it out at the world afterward. And I thought, wow, I can do that. And I got this burning urge. And you know, it's never left me. It was as if, you know, a little hand came down and said, I'm going to tell you what you should do with your life.
There's something about reporting, about journalism, and you all know this here. Once it's in your blood, it never goes away. For me, as I mentioned, it was something that a professor said, and the only job I could get was as a secretary, as Claire mentioned, and I went to work in the newsroom of the ABC affiliate in Atlanta because the CBS and the NBC affiliate news directors figured, you know, why do we, in fact, they said to me, we don't really need any other women here. at this point. But I worked for a year or so, and after a year, they asked me to audition for the weekend weather job, and I told them I was not interested, that I had a political science degree, and I wanted to cover politics. And the news director looked at me and he said, look, if you ever think you're ever going to get a shot in news and journalism, you have to try out, you have to see what you're capable of. So I reluctantly did that. And Lesley, it was like Cinderella, because during the week, I would come in, answer the phone, clean the film, because it was back in the days of film, and write letters for the news director. And then I'd come in on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock and memorize all the weather wires and do the weather at 11. It lasted 6 months. We agreed at the end of that time that we were not mutually, it was not a mutually, shall we say, beneficial arrangement. And then fortune smiled on me, and I was offered a job as a reporter at the CBS station in Atlanta, covering the state legislature. But it was a day, I mean, Lesley, you need to talk about this too. It was so unusual to have women doing what we were doing then.
Well, CBS, when affirmative action passed, there was a memo that went out, and a friend of mine in New York, I was working in Boston at a television station, and the memo said the next people you will hire will be women or a minority. And he called me, and I had that much experience. And they were so excited that there was someone applying for the job with experience. But what was wonderful about CBS in those days, at least the Washington Bureau, was that they were committed to this program of affirmative action, completely committed. It's the story, if the CEO, if the top is saying this is our policy, that's the only way things really move forward. And we were apprentices. There were 3 of us. There was me, Connie Chung, and Bernie Shaw, if you remember Bernie. So they covered the waterfront, let's say. And we sat in these little children's desks. They were really school desks. We didn't have an office. We didn't have a grown-up desk. But they were committed to bringing us along. So we were basically apprenticed to the senior, seasoned, veteran correspondents, and we learned by osmosis. But they'd send us out on the story. We didn't report it really, but we watched what the big guys did and brought us along. We weren't forced out there to fall on our faces. And they wanted to make this work for us. And they did. Bernie was a major correspondent at CNN for years, and Connie was in the business for a long time, and they can't believe I'm still here, but I am still going. So it worked. But I think they should revive the apprentice system. It worked. It really was, it worked. You know, you and I got a memo from the Deadline Club with some suggested topics.
We did.
We did. And kind of in there, kind of in every topic was a suggestion that we talk about Me Too. So you and I came along, both of us covering the White House in the 70s. I'm not going to ask you about Me Too specifically, but did you face any outright sexism?
I absolutely did, but it was a subtle kind of thing. I was covering the Georgia legislature. This was the early 1970s. Lester Maddox had been the governor of Georgia. You remember the famous pickaxe and his restaurant. It was still a time of lingering segregation in the South, and when women in the South, and as I learned when I came to Washington, were still needing to prove ourselves. That for example, at the station where I worked, and this is the truth, when I told the news director I wanted to work as a reporter, this is at the first station, he said to me, I don't know why you're interested in doing that. We already have a woman reporter. And then later, when I became a reporter covering the state legislature, there was the ABC, CBS, and NBC affiliates in Atlanta. The NBC station had a woman reporter, and the CBS station had a woman reporter. And when they did gradually start to hire more women, there were so few of us that they often, I think, without telling us, kind of pitted us against each other, kind of say, well, you know, you're doing this and she's doing that, and let's see how you get along. And I felt that way when I came to Washington in a way. I don't know if you did, but you know, they would say, well, you know, there's so-and-so at ABC and there's Lesley at CBS, and kind of let's see what happens.
Like the cat fight.
Like they were expecting women to get into some sort of unusual competition. It turned out that, yes, we're competitive. You're competitive. You're reporters. You work for different news organizations. But in most cases, I think women ended up supporting each other.
Absolutely.
And being our biggest cheerleaders of other women journalists.
So true, so true. When I got to cover the White House, you were already covering Jimmy Carter. And they were Southerners. And I thought that they treated you and me differently, the Carter White House. This was the age of the Equal Rights Amendment. The women in the country and a lot of men, including the president, were very much for getting this passed, and each state legislature had to pass it. And so that was going on. The president supported it, and women reporters were being treated as kind of second-class citizens. This is so interesting to me because I can't really explain it. Then Reagan came in. He did not support the Equal Rights Amendment. In fact, he opposed it strenuously, and yet that White House showed no sexism. I felt I was being treated like one of the guys, and I never could figure out why. I have figured it out. I figured it out. Finally, here's why. This is my personal analysis. Democrats think that reporters are on their side. They expect reporters to be kind to them and gentle. They expect it because they assume we're liberals and we're going to be on their side. And when we're not, and when we're tough, they feel betrayed. They feel that there's been a family break of some kind. The Republicans expect us to be tough, and they just accept that we're tough, and we're all treated the same. It's very professional. They don't call you up at night and yell at you. Were you yelled at by the Jimmy Carter people?
Yes.
Yes, we all were. And that didn't happen because the Republicans just accepted, in those days, the First Amendment. They respected what we were doing, and it was all extremely professional.
I do think there's something to that about the Democrats and the Republicans. I also think that when Reagan came to town, he came from, of course, having spent, a couple of decades in Hollywood. He was used to a tough, scrutinizing press corps. He was used to having both favorable and very unfavorable things written about him. And so I think he brought that comfort level. Maybe he didn't like it, but he was just used to it, and it kind of rolled off his back, didn't bother him. Jimmy Carter, it wasn't that he had great coverage in Atlanta and Georgia, but you're right, for whatever reason, he didn't expect the kind of coverage that he got when he got to Washington.
And Reagan, well, Jimmy Carter was a relatively young president, and he had a very young staff. Reagan came in, he was already in his 70s, and his kind of motto was, he'd seen it all, this too shall pass. Jimmy Carter stayed up all night with the lights on. There was a sense of crisis at every minute. And then Reagan came in and he went home early to see mommy. And I mean, really. So everything just settled, including dealing with us.
I think that's right. The other thing about the Reagan people is they really brought, and this is getting us away from the women question. We can come back to that. But
we don't have to.
I think the Reagan people were so good at figuring out stagecraft and how to tell a story. In fact, Lesley has one of the best examples of that, and I'm going to get her to tell you. But they knew how to put on an event. They knew how to put on, when they had an announcement to make, they didn't just say, okay, we're going to have a news conference and you're going to cover it. I mean, they would stand the president in front of a cheering crowd, and that's what you would see. And Lesley, pick it up from there, because you've got a great story about this.
All right, I do. So I did
See, we've been doing this for so long, we can finish each other's
yin and yang here. I did a story that was I must admit, tough about Reagan right before his re-election. So at the end of that campaign. And his theme was Morning in America. And my theme of my story was that he was trying to create a sense of amnesia about his policies that had become unpopular. He was doing a lot of budget cutting. Remember the vegetable? What was the vegetable? Ketchup was a vegetable. Ketchup. And that was unpopular, so he went out to try and erase whatever the public didn't like. And so he was cutting ribbons at nursing homes, and I would show the video of him cutting the ribbon. And I said, little would you know from this event that he tried to cut the budget for nursing homes. And he did. He went to a handicap Olympics event, and I said, little would you know he tried to cut the budget for the disabled, and on and on and on and on. And then the White House loved the piece, absolutely loved it. Told me they were going to give me a big scoop, a big thank you. And I said, why? Didn't you hear what I said? And they said, nobody heard what you said. They said, you just ran these glorious pictures of Morning in America, and no one heard what you were drowned out by the pictures. And a reporter at the Washington Post took this to a focus group. I was in the room, and they had no idea what I had said. Really.
And candidates after that in both parties followed for the longest time the Reagan playbook, because with Mike Deaver, who had worked for Governor Reagan in California, they figured out the formula for how to do great TV and, frankly, to get around the press in many ways, or at least they thought they were getting around the press.
Judy, I'm going to bring us a little up to date, because we're being awfully historical. I think we should,
because I think a lot of these people here were not born. I think we're all right.
And you know what? We don't want to know. Can you see us way over there? Hi there. Judy, you're doing a nightly show in the Trump years. First of all, I want to say that you do one of the best interviews on television. You are so tough. It's true. You are persistent. You are tenacious. You ask every right question, but you do it in a way that is fair and respectful. And really, I'm at home applauding you every night. But my question to you, being in the hurly-burly of what's going on, how do you personally contend with the charges of fake news? How do you deal with this on a daily basis? Because you're interviewing people who make the charge.
It's called compartmentalizing. My blood is boiling when I hear not just our political leaders, but others say that the press is fake and that we are making it up and that we have an agenda and that, and on and on and on. It makes me very angry. I've been doing this for 50 years almost, and I know the finest people I know are journalists who devote their lives to getting the facts and getting the story right, and if they don't get it right the first time, doing it over and over again. And I've been privileged to know hundreds and hundreds of journalists. I'm so proud of them. And so when I hear our political leaders and others say that journalists are enemies of the American people, it makes my blood boil. So that's one part of me. The other part of me is the part that has to be on the news and talking to people about what's going on. I don't think it serves us as journalists, us at the NewsHour, to get into any sort of contest with President Trump or anyone else. If they want to attack us for what we're doing, the best way we can respond, in my view, is to continue to do the great work that each and every one of us can do. That's the way to combat this. And not to get into some kind of personal or personality contest with the president. I recognize that there are individuals the president has singled out, and when that happens, perhaps that's an occasion for that person to speak up for himself or herself. And there have now been so many people who've been singled out. But I think for the most part, the American people, the people we serve, are much better served if we do our job. If we get up in the morning and we go to work and we report the news and we do the best we can and we just keep on and keep on and keep on and keep on.
Head down. Has the White House ever called you to complain?
They find other ways to complain.
How's that?
Well, there's social media, you may have noticed. There are ways of sending the word out through Twitter and other methods. And yes, there are phone calls at times, and yes, there are emails at times. But a lot of it is done in social media because, as you know, there's an entire and growing wing of the press that is now supportive of the president from an ideological standpoint. And often what you see is if the president has said something, and this is not just a news hour, and the White House and they don't believe it's covered in the way they think it should be, then they rise up and then they attack those who are doing the reporting.
It's in a swarm. Should we get some questions from everybody here? Any questions? Judy and I have more to ask each other. We thought maybe...
Well, I can also ask Lesley while we're waiting. Please ask questions, but I want to ask Lesley, how do you deal? I mean, you had the first interview with Donald Trump after the election. Big scoop. Everybody wanted this interview. Congratulations.
I'm happy I got it.
I mean, how did you deal with it?
Before the interview, I met with him in Trump Tower. And he really is the same off camera that he is on camera, exactly the same. And at one point, he started to attack the press. And it's just me and my boss and him. He has a huge office. And he's attacking the press. And there were no cameras. There was nothing going on. And I said, you know, that is getting tired. Why are you doing this? You're doing it over and over, and it's boring, and it's time to end that. You know, you've won the nomination. And why do you keep hammering at this? And he said, you know why I do it? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all, so when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you. He said that. So put that in your head for a minute. Yeah. Now are we ready for questions?
We're all absorbing what you just said. All right, you've got great journalists in this room. We can't quite see for the lights.
Thank you both for being here. It's extraordinary to have you both here, and it's so enjoyable to hear your perspective. I'm curious, out of all the administrations you have covered, which president did you enjoy covering the most? And a second question to that, which one was the most accessible?
Was most accessible?
Yes.
Same answer.
You go first.
My favorite was George Herbert Walker Bush. I think he had a much more successful presidency than he's given credit for, but he only had one term, and that's what happens. He had so much integrity. He was an honorable person, and he conducted the presidency that way. And he got so much done. The way he basically eased Eastern Europe out of the Soviet sphere without one shot fired, he did that. He did many other things. And he was just adorable. I'll tell you, he was adorable. He was very accessible. I used to bump into him in the hallways of the White House. Did you cover him?
I covered him when I was at the NewsHour, the first go-round, and so would come and go, but I wasn't at the White House full time. I would say, you know, they all have their pluses and their minuses. This is going to sound like a cop-out, but every one of them has the moments when it's a lot of fun to cover them, and then there are moments when they feel they are being misunderstood and, frankly, disrespected by the press. Not a single one of them has left office feeling they got a fair shot in the media. Would you agree with that?
They all hate us.
Whether equal opportunity haters or dislike the press. And why is that? Because the press does its job. And, you know, for people, you know, Lesley's point earlier about Democrats think the press is going to be on their side, Republicans expect us not to be. Having said that, they both. I've never known a Democratic president or a Democratic senator or maybe a couple of exceptions in the Senate, Democratic and Republican senators. But in general, politicians think the press is tough on them. And that's why they don't give us the access that, you know, we think we should have. I will say some of them are harder. I've found every president since George Herbert Walker Bush increasingly difficult to cover. I mean, Clinton was accessible at moments, but then Hillary Clinton as First Lady was very difficult to cover because she did not, want to answer a lot of questions. So that became an issue. But I think it's gotten harder.
Yeah. When Reagan was president, I covered him too. Up until the beginning of his presidency, the press used to be able to get extremely close to a president physically, and we could go in with our microphones and basically shove them in the president's face. And then Reagan was shot. And after that, we were forced way back. This goes to the question about accessibility. And after that, our ability to shout questions or gently ask questions, whatever, became much, much, much more difficult. And of course, you and I had Sam Donaldson covering with us, who was a foghorn, and he could shout. I think he could shout about 2 miles, and the president would hear his question.
It used to make me furious. I mean, I'd be shouting what I thought was in a loud voice, and then Sam would boom over, and then the president's head would turn.
Exactly.
Sam Donaldson's voice.
How are we doing?
Right here.
Here.
My question deals with the crisis that we're facing today, and the fact that people are all saying that we are delivering fake news, and the fact that the numbers that are saying that appear to be growing. What do you think that we can do as the news media, as reporters, to make people aware of the importance of the truth and chasing the truth, and the lives that are even lost in chasing the truth, and how important the job, the career of journalism is?
I covered Watergate, and people forget how intense the dislike of the press was then, and President Nixon and his Vice President Agnew whipped it up. The same, it's not exactly as pointed as it is now, but it was similar. And as now, as Judy was saying, the press just kept doing its job, putting his head down, not fighting back, just doing its job. And in the end, the press at that stage, this would be in the middle 70s, had enormous respect, meaning that public opinion completely flipped. Now, we don't have much respect now. We're way down there. We're down there with the lawyers. I see this is not an audience of lawyers. That always gets a laugh. But I think what you said, Judy, we just do our jobs. That's it.
And I would add, though, that I think that we are in such a bad place with so many increasing numbers of Americans that it's going to take time to get through this. This is not going to go away quickly. Yes, we have to do our job. That's what we should continue to do. But I think we're going to need to think about how do we educate children as they're growing up about the role of the media. I think there need to be more programs in our schools talking about the role of journalism. I don't think we've done enough of that. I think a lot of people kind of have a vague idea of what the press is, but frankly, we are now seen by, what is it, 1/3 of Americans or more as being ideologues, as being anti-Trump. And it's interesting, Republicans mainly see the press as prejudiced, biased. Democrats and independents tend to see the press as somewhat less biased. So we're in a tough spot right now, and I think it's going to take the long haul before we work our way through this.
Judy, when we retire, I think we should go out and campaign for civics in the schools. Bring it back.
Sign me.
Civics?
Sign me up. I'll do it.
Would you take civics?
Yeah.
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 It's a real, everybody older I don't know what age, maybe over 50 or 60, took civics, everybody in the whole country, and then they stopped teaching it, which would do exactly what you just said. We were all taught it.
Yeah, I think we need some kind of program. And I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. Every state has its own educational rules, regulations. But I do think the public, we should be having more public conversations about this. I get asked, and I know you do too, everywhere I go to speak around the country, if I do an event for public television or somebody else, people ask me, well, talk about the role of the press and talk about facts and why do facts matter. So I think that conversation is starting, but we need to do more and more of it.
I think we should end by ringing the bell for the First Amendment. I'm serious. Somebody ring a bell. First Amendment means everything. Yes. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. And they turned the mic off. One more thing. Judy's right. When we started in journalism, the assumption was that women would get only in cat fights, and we proved them totally wrong.
I love it. Mwah.